This is the brand new Mini JRX2 from Losi, and it's a 1/16 scale reproduction of the very first car Losi ever made many years ago. So today, we're gonna check out the Mini JRX2, see how accurate it is to the real thing, compare it to the more modern Mini B Buggy, and then we'll just take it outside and drive it. Now, the original JRX2 Buggy was released way back in 1988, at a time in the hobby when all RC cars were sold as kits, but that's not the case today, and the Mini JRX2 comes assembled, including brushed electronics, and it's available in 3 different color schemes, including the box art car, which is the same as the original box art car from so many years ago. Now, this is 1/16 scale, which gives it a length of about 10 inches with a weight just over 1 pound. Now, it does have this really cool retro look and retro buggy body, which you just don't see anymore. Now, to pop the body off, there are 4 body clips, and they're pretty tight on there, so we've been using needle nose pliers to get them off. Now, with the body clips off, the body just pulls kind of right up. Now, it uses wing stays, this metal wire on here, where the wing used to be a separate piece from the body, it's now attached onto the body underneath. The body has some really cool graphics. This is a big solid graphic that's going down here with these old school Team Losi decals that you just don't see anymore. This looks really accurate for how a buggy body would have looked back then. Now, for the chassis, this thing is a 2-wheel drive buggy, and it starts with using a fiberglass chassis down here. This features about 20 degrees of kick up in the chassis. Now, in the front bulkhead, it overlaps a little bit over the front chassis to help protect that sensitive fiberglass material. Now, the Mini JRX2 uses the wide track front end. It's an independent suspension up here with wide track arms. There's a fiberglass shock tower, our aluminum bodied shocks. This is kind of a trip down memory lane to see these spring collars used before threaded shock bodies, where you would just adjust this collar by tightening or loosening that screw. Kind of cool to see. Another really trip down memory lane is seeing all the hinge pins have E-clips used on the end of them. That's how they did it all the time, and love it or hate it, it's on here, just as it should be. Now, our front tires here are just rubber ribbed front tires with plastic lightweight wheels in the exact style that they would have been. A 7mm wheel nut pops the front and the rear wheel nuts off, and the front tire, you see, it uses bearings inside to spin on that axle. There's also adjustable turnbuckles used on all 4 corners, and those turnbuckles are notched so you know their thread direction. The Mini JRX2 also uses a rack type steering with, I believe they're plastic bell cranks, but that steering rack is a metal piece. Now, moving down the chassis a little bit, we get to the battery box, which uses this body clip to unlock and flip open the latch, and then the battery slides right into the rear bulkhead area. Now, a really interesting and unique feature on the JRX2 is this 5-link rear end, and this was designed to handle really rough tracks. In the 80s, tracks were not as manicured, they were rougher, not nearly as cared for and manicured and smooth and prepared as today's modern tracks. So this rear end really helped kind of absorb rough terrain. Now, these trailing arms connect back here where almost the battery box flap latch is, and they connect all the way down to the top of the hub on the back, and then also on the very bottom of the hub on the back. Of course, there's more aluminum shock-bodied shocks used in the rear end with those cool collars. This rear bulkhead is really interesting. It uses, again, they've got adjustable turnbuckles back here, and these posts on the rear bulkhead would have been used for the wing stay. That's where you would slide the metal wire of the wing into to secure it in. And you would just pull the wing on and off really easily to get the body on and off. The transmission back here is really interesting. It's a revised transmission, so it's been updated to be more efficient. There's fewer gears, and the car is just a bit more robust in the power plant, so you can use a brushless system in here. There's also plastic drive shafts used in the rear end. They're telescoping plastic drive shafts. Now, the rear arms are really interesting. These are kind of not really suspension arms, but more like links that are going all the way down to the hubs with more E-clips used in between at the chassis. It's a really interesting setup. Now, there's also an aluminum motor plate, or a skid plate, if you will, back here in the rear end, and it says JRX2 right on it. Now, these rear tires, they are rubber stepped pin tires, really good for loamy dirt. 7mm wheel nut will pop the rear tires off and show you that they are pin drive wheels. Now sadly, nobody here has an original JRX2 that we can show and compare against this mini version, but this website, vintagelosi.com, has some really terrific information and all these photos on the original JRX2. And if you compare the original 10 scale version to this new mini version, the Mini is almost a carbon copy of that dang car. They are so similar. One of the big differences that you'll find with the Mini version is that it's using a fiberglass chassis. I believe the real car back in '88 would have come with a carbon fiber chassis. But other than that, you're gonna just find little tiny small differences. I believe the servo placement was the other way around. The original car had a different, more complicated transmission that is overkill for today's use. The Mini version has all metric hardware, where the original Buggy did not. And then another really big difference is that the original JRX2 would have had no electronics because you had to build it as a kit, where the Mini comes fully stocked with electronics. Now for the servo, it's the SX107 Metal Gear servo from Spectrum. They've used this in some of their other Mini cars, and it has a servo saver built onto it. It's the same servo used in the Mini B, which means that the aluminum servo horn for the Mini B and Mini T should fit right on here, no problem. For the receiver and ESC, it's a 2-in-1 unit where it's built in, and then back here for the motor, it's a 280 sized 42 turn Junior's Choice replica. Now something interesting is that this should be able to handle the brushless system that's made for the Mini B and Mini T. There is an issue though, because the transmitter included is the Spectrum SLT2. And it's a decent transmitter, but the receiver for it is built into the speed controller. So in order to make the brushless system work with this car, you'll need to pick up the SLT receiver with the brushless system and then bind this transmitter to that receiver. That way you have individual components. You don't have to use this 2-in-1 system because you can't use this with the brushless. Now what's interesting about this SLT2 transmitter, on the backside it has one of those throttle adjustment switches where it's a 3-position switch to provide 100% power, 75% or only 50%, which is ideal for a buggy of this size if you're going to be using it indoors in closed spaces, small backyard, or if it's going to be for a new driver. Now the last bit of electronics are the battery and charger, because one is included, and then you have just a basic Dynamite USB charger, charges at 0.5 amp I believe, and then with it is the Dynamite 2-cell LiPo battery, 650 milliamp hour and a 20C, and this thing should rip pretty good in this car. So let's find out, how fast is the Mini JRX2? For the first speed test, it's at 50% throttle power via the selector on the transmitter, and the top speed achieved is 12 miles an hour. Bumping the throttle switch up to 75% power gave us a little boost in speed, and this time we hit 14 miles an hour. And lastly, we switched that throttle power switch on the transmitter to 100% and tried again. This time we achieved 15 miles an hour. Now let's get out of here and go drive. This is the loading dock right near where we do our speed runs, and we usually just come over here afterwards just to mess around and get a feel for the car. Now this is our indoor drift track at our local hobby shop, and the Mini JRX2 scoots around pretty good here after a little practice for the driver. The tight driving lanes are a real challenge, but I found that turning down the throttle limiter on the back of the transmitter to 75% power made it way more manageable. Now lastly, we went to the dustiest, most hard-packed dirt location I could think of, and that's our local BMX pump track, and it did not disappoint.
Our BMX pump track just got fresh dirt. Oh, that is good. We've been ripping this thing for probably about 10 solid minutes, probably about 100% throttle too most of the time. And the motor's a little warm, but it's not bad. I'm holding it down, and it's definitely within the safe zone, and it's about 89 degrees out here today. Pretty dusty, but it rips.
And it really did rip. In those loose, dusty, dirty track conditions, the car hooked up way better than I thought it was going to. Now, I promised a little comparison with the Mini B Buggy, and we have one here. Now, there's some really big differences between these two cars, and I know there's a lot of collectors watching this that probably won't drive this vehicle very much, but it has a real-world application that it really excels at. Now, the biggest differences to take in mind for people who want to drive these and want to race and have a little backyard action, the Mini JRX2 is a rear motor buggy. It's designed for loose conditions. The Mini B, on the other hand, is a mid-motor buggy. This is really meant for high traction stuff. Throw it on Astro, on carpet, on asphalt, it's going to excel. The only con that I found with the Mini JRX2 is that if you drive it in high traction areas, the servo saver is pretty spongy. That aluminum servo horn upgrade would be the first thing that I probably put on this car to upgrade it and to get a little bit more precision out of that steering. Both cool cars, modern, high traction, older, low traction. Guys, thanks for watching this video on the Mini JRX2. It's been a trip down memory lane. If you want info on this, we'll have links down below, or if you want more RC videos, check these out.